Hey everybody, today we're going to be reviewing the BlackMagic Micro Cinema Camera that just came out, and I just got it a few days ago, and I'm really questioning who camera is for and what I could actually use it for. So hopefully this review will help you guys just a little bit. I want to break it down and show you guys all the features that are on this camera, and in that way hopefully it will help you decide if this is the camera for you. So the exterior of the camera, we'll just go around it. Micro Four Thirds sensor, Micro Four Thirds ring. You have your quick release here for all your lenses. Also disengages the electronics on the actual lens itself, so can be kind of useful if your aperture ring gets stuck inside your lens. Instead of taking it all the way off, you could essentially just push this button and let it go, and it should reset it by making your aperture ring open and then close back down, which is pretty nice. Sensor is exactly the same thing as the BlackMagic Pocket camera. So I will tell you guys right away, the only two differences between this camera and the BlackMagic Pocket Cinema Camera is this one doesn't have a screen, as you guys can see that, and you can record in ProRes 422 at 1080p at 60 frames a second. That is honestly the only two differences, is that you don't have a screen and you can record that 60 frames per second 1080p, but only in ProRes 422. It won't work in RAW. So if you guys are thinking, ooh, I could get 60 frames a second in RAW, not true. It won't come with that. So going on with the actual front of this camera, we have a nice rubber kinda around the mount here. Feels good. Up here at the top, there's two little dots. And those are two little indents. Those are your microphones on this actual camera. Now, to be honest, they sound like crap. And the reason they do, obviously, is because they're these two little small pinholes. But the only other thing is, since they're built onto the body, you can hear every single button click that you make with this camera over your footage. So I wouldn't use the internal microphones to record audio. Always use an external microphone or even external audio off of the actual camera. That's what I do with most of my stuff. On top here, you also have a small indicator light. It's an LED, and I'll plug a battery in so you guys can quickly see that. And we'll power it on. So your indicator light, I believe, has three colors. I believe it's white, which is standby, red, which means it's recording, and then I think yellow, possibly, don't quote me, but if you have a low battery, I think it might turn yellow, or it might just start flashing red. I totally forget what it is. But to answer some questions that are floating around online, yes, there's several different settings for this light. You can set it on dim, you can set it on a higher dim, or you can set it on high. And then finally, yes, you can shut it off completely so it won't turn on, which is very nice because a lot of people can feel uncomfortable when you hit that record button and the light turns red. Then they know that they're being recorded, and it makes people feel really uncomfortable and not themselves. So that might be a really good use case of shutting it off. So on the right side here of the camera, on the top right side, you have a record start stop button, followed by your play button, a rewind button, a fast forward, a menu, and a power button. Now the buttons on this camera feel exactly the same, and they're really tightly pushed together because it's so small. They have a glossy feel. They feel exactly the same all the way through, except the bottom button, which is your power button. BlackMagic was smart enough to figure out that too many people make too many mistakes already with these buttons that they don't want them powering off the camera accidentally. So what they did is they actually indented the power button here, so it does feel like it's pushed into the camera a little bit more, and it will let any user or operator know that, ooh, this button is kind of pushed in already. I probably shouldn't hit that. I found out when I was going through the navigation system of the menus, it was very, very difficult to use this, and it's almost like a turn off. Like, this is just awful setup, but it's meant to be controlled through this port right here, which is on the side here. This is an expansion port, and the expansion port is meant for a lot of customization and controlling the camera using third-party things such as a control board, or even hooking it up to a drone and having a pilot with a controller be able to control this. You can also do different modifications as well. We'll come back to this in just a little bit. On top of this expansion port, you have a full HDMI port, which is great. It no longer suffers from a micro HDMI problem, which I think is a huge problem on the pocket cinema cameras. I see a lot of people saying that theirs break, and a lot of people say that they fall out really easy. That's not the case with the HDMI one right here, because it's a full HDMI. It sticks in all the way and it stays there. You don't need to have a custom rig to fix that. Now, on the same side, you guys will also notice that there's these vent fans. Yes, there is a built-in fan, and yes, it is very, very quiet. I'm surprised how quiet it actually is. It's actually so quiet that even the crappy onboard microphone doesn't pick it up at all. I will have to say though, these slots here do not give you very much protection. Yes, they give you protection from you sticking your fingers inside the camera, but there's no screen in between. So if you are using this camera for action sports, things outside, and it is dusty and there's a lot of debris, smoke, things like that, it will essentially get sucked into the camera. Now, the good part about it is that the camera, the cooling is all behind the sensor, so you're not actually dragging any air across the sensor, so you shouldn't have to worry about debris getting on your actual sensor's image, which is really nice. From my understanding and just playing with it, the air is sucked in from this side and it is blown out this side. You can tell this when you power the camera on, and when it starts to get a little bit hot, you can feel the heat dissipate off of this side of the actual camera. So moving to the other side of the camera, we have a recorder right here, a microphone input, input, and then we have our SD card slot. Now, the microphone input, I've heard reviews that it wasn't really that great. I wouldn't use an onboard microphone port anyways. I, again, use all external audio. So what I would use is maybe a shotgun microphone, a small one, and use this as a pretty much sample audio, or some type of audio that I can represent the actual scene with and match up later in post. The other thing is the SD card slot. This is a full SD card slot. It's not micro, it's nothing like that. A lot of people have SD cards. One problem, however, is you need to use a certain SD card. The standard is the SanDisk Extreme Pro cards. They need to have a really fast write speed of, I think, 90 or 95 and above, and those are the only ones that will work. People who own a BlackMagic Pocket Cinema Camera, they already know this. On the bottom of the camera, just the standard tripod screw, I always forget what they are, but you end up getting 3 of them, which seems like a really nice thing, like to have 3 of those on the bottom. But in reality, what you would end up doing is you would end up blocking those off. If you put a tripod mount on there anywhere, you would end up blocking all of those off. Other thing is, if you even put an articulating arm on here, it ends up covering up 2 of them, and then if you want to put like a third or something like that, or a second one, you just won't be able to use it. I would honestly suggest anyone who get this camera, if you're going to add any expansion, to get a cage. And I know Woodcam makes an actual cage for this. I'm actually thinking about investing some money into it. I believe it's around $125 USD. Also on the bottom, you have a DV port right here. And your DV port is basically DV to USB, and that's how you do software and firmware updates. Moving to the actual top of the camera, you have another one of those tripod mounts. Again, I think it's 3/4. Moving to the actual back of the camera, the most important part is the power of the actual camera. So this camera uses Canon LPE6 batteries. Very popular batteries by Canon. I believe they're on the 70, 70 Mark II, 5D, 5D Mark II, 5D Mark III, Canon 5D SR, 5DS. It's essentially Canon's flagship battery. They're everywhere. They also last a hell of a lot longer than the Nikon batteries that come in the Pocket Cinema camera. So that's something that is definitely an increase. Most people though who own a Pocket Cinema camera, because it's been out for so long, are using third-party battery packs and things like that so they can do all-day shooting with no problems. This battery, these Canon batteries, they send you one with the actual BlackMagic Micro Cinema Camera, but it is just some off-brand battery. I don't know what it is, but it is an LPE6, you know, form factor. And they also don't send you a wall charger or anything with it, which we'll get into in just a second. So in my experience, I've gotten around 40 to maybe 60 minutes using this actual battery. I still think they drain quite quickly. Plugging the actual battery in is very simple and easy. The battery's not going to fall out at all either. You can really try to force it out, but it's just not going to, because BlackMagic was smart enough to actually put a locking mechanism on top here. So with this locking mechanism, you basically pull forward and you just lift out and your battery comes out simple and easy, which is great, especially if you're going to send this up on a drone and something were to happen. The battery's not going to fall out of the actual camera and you'll still have full functionality of it in recording. The body of the actual camera is plastic. They try to keep it very, very lightweight, which makes perfect sense. It's supposed to be a micro camera, very small, lightweight, and be able to put on a gimbal and a drone, I guess, very, very quickly and be light. Metal in the front, which I believe is metal. A lot of people are saying it's just plastic, but it honestly, it feels, it scratches, it even sounds like metal. In the back, however, it feels like plastic. You can definitely tell it's plastic in the back, especially when you get to the mount here. I do want to mention, this isn't like a mount that you can just take off like on some cameras. This mount is actually built into the actual body of the camera. So if you were to accidentally like break one of these battery mount pieces off or something like that, it's essentially stuck on your camera. You're breaking your camera at that point in time. This won't come off. I've even looked at all the screws and things like that. This is one solid piece that, you know, won't come off. I've seen a few people do modifications where they take a Canon dummy battery, put that on, and then they attach like a Sony battery onto that, or a third-party battery onto that as well, which I think is really cool. I know there's a lot of people who are asking, what's the difference between the Micro Cinema camera and the Micro Studio camera? And really, the biggest difference is that the Studio camera is named specifically to be in a studio. What I mean by that is that camera demands a lot of good lit light or good lit scenes. It's built for broadcast. It doesn't have internal recording on the actual camera. So this camera ends up having an SD card slot, and this can record internally on the actual camera. The other one doesn't. It's actually replaced by two ports right here that are meant to go to broadcast boards or to a monitor that can actually record. It's also a 4K sensor. The studio camera is actually meant for a studio that is lit very well, and I can't stress enough how much BlackMagic has tried to make that clear to their buying audience that their camera is not good in low light. It just is not good in low light. It's a studio camera. It's meant to be in a lit studio where there's a bunch of professional lighting that's always on and it's lighting up their subjects. And that's where a lot of people kind of flounder off. They say, well, I want to get 4K quality and I'm going to record to an external monitor anyways, so I'll just go for the 4K. Then they get their camera and they realize like 4K resolution stinks because all it does is enhance the graininess and the bad color and the bad light and everything like that. So 1080p isn't bad, especially 1080p raw actually isn't that bad, especially for me. I'm specifically going to YouTube and Vimeo and things like that with this. Not a lot of people can even have the bandwidth to download or play a 4K video, so there's a lot of little things like that to keep in mind. The other thing with that camera too is, again, there's no internal recording. Where this camera, what is nice is I could actually take this camera and I could record in basically 1080p at 60 FPS, or I could record in 1080p raw here, and then on an external recorder, record a separate track into something else. Like I could record 1080p at like ProRes 422, or I could record in ProRes HQ, or I could record in a different format. So basically I essentially have two different recorders going on at the same time, one internally and one on the external monitor. Now, I did buy the BlackMagic Video Assistant, the 1080p one with touchscreen. It just hasn't arrived yet, but I'm really excited to use that. Like I said, you do need to have an external monitor or something to actually see this, to get into menus, to even see your image. So you are always coughing up a little bit more money. So $1,000 doesn't seem that bad, but then you start adding 500 here, 300 here, it can start to add up quite a bit. And at that price range, there's a lot of different cameras out there when you start getting to $1,500. I would say this camera is definitely built for somebody who wants to get into modifying, making electronics, making things happen, I would say. BlackMagic ends up giving you one of these, which is really, really nice. This is what it looks like. You can buy these everywhere at like electronic stores, computer stores. They're like 15 cents. It's not anything new. It's just that people are starting to use them more and more because there's more technology that can utilize them. So this is what they give you. And I know this looks exactly like a big mess right here, but it's very simple to use and it's very simple to understand, especially if you're even new with cameras. So how this works is you have your expansion port right here, and you can essentially plug in this expansion cable, and it does come with 2 screws, so it actually screws into the body so it won't fall out when you're actually operating the camera. Your expansion ports are basically mapped out on your actual camera. So I believe there's 15 pins on the actual expansion port, and each pin does something different. There's ground pins, and then there's S-bus pins and different things like that. And all those pins lead to all these wires that are coming off. And you'll notice right away that there's actually a really simple thing with all these wires, is that they consist of 2 wires, a red and a white. And essentially what BlackMagic did is they gave you these little ports at the end. Most people, what they'll do is they'll just give you wires, and the wire will be hanging off of each cable. So they kind of just gave you these as a little extra bonus. You can actually go out and buy these and clamp them on. But these are nice because a lot of drones and stuff, they usually have a little hub that you can just plug these right into, and you don't have to worry about wiring. So how this works, and I do want to say that Cheesy Cam has a video of, I believe one of their professionals made a rig, and he used all these buttons on a pad that he can touch and control the camera. Just a quick example, this is servo channel 3. So I would have to look up what that actually controls, but for this demonstration, I'll just say that this controls f-stop. So what I would do is right here you can see those two wires, and then you can see the two exposed metal wires at the top. You could take a jumper wire, so just another wire from both ends, touch one there, or like solder it onto there, and then take your finger with the other end of the wire and touch that. And what it will do is, because there's power running through here, it will change the wavelength, and it will tell the camera, hey, that something happened. And essentially, because this is your f-stop, it would move your f-stop up or down, which is really cool. So that opens up a lot of customization on these cameras. You can do that with pretty much everything. So you could grab another wire here that maybe controls your white balance, another one that controls ISO. They all pretty much do something. And I do have to tell you guys, if you do get this camera, save the box, because the box right here on the side has a thing called expansion port. And on the expansion port, they actually give you a map of every single wire and every pin and what it does. A lot of people also have questions as well as to what monitors will work for this. And I'll tell you, any monitor will work for this camera as long as it's HDMI. So you could do even full HDMI to HDMI mini, or just full to full. You could plug it into a computer monitor, a TV, pretty much anything. So if you don't want to spend money on a really nice field monitor, you could go out and buy like a cheap $100 one or a $150 field monitor. There's still focus peaking within the camera, so you can still put focus peaking actually on the monitor and see what's in focus. You can access your menus, see everything. You might not just have the greatest resolution unless you start spending a little more money. Also, if you guys decide that you don't want to spend the $500 on a BlackMagic video assistant, you just basically lose the ability to record on a monitor if you don't buy a monitor that has it. If you specifically buy just a standard $150 monitor just to view what's going on and to hit record, that will definitely work totally fine. I do have to tell you though, there's one small little snag that I've ran into, and I don't know if this is a huge issue or it's even been addressed to anyone. I did plug this camera in through HDMI to one of my computer monitors, and when I ended up messing with the menus and the video codecs, I turned the camera into 24 frames a second. When I did that, my actual monitor did not support a 24 frames per second frame rate, and I ended up getting a signal out of bounds, or some type of error on my actual computer screen, basically saying that it couldn't connect to the camera because there was a problem with the frequency the camera was running at and what the monitor could run at. I tried shutting the camera off, unplugging it, plugging it back in. Nothing seemed to work, so I actually had to watch a YouTube video of somebody else describing the buttons and what they do, and kind of following along blindly without anything on the screen until I could switch it back to a 30 frames per second. I don't know if this is a huge issue on my part of things, or if this is just a general overall issue with a lot of these cameras. I do want to say it wasn't just one monitor I was using. I used 3 monitors and 2 televisions, and it still gave me that like signal out of bounds error or something around that line. I just want to let you guys know, so when you're messing with your settings, learn the camera menu kind of by heart. It takes a long time. I do have to also tell you, no matter what field monitor you get, you still cannot control the camera from that actual monitor. The only thing you can do is monitor your picture and see menus. But even in the BlackMagic Video Assistant, whether it be the 1080p or the 4K or whatever, you still can't even use the touch screen to control anything. You still have to come out to the front of the camera and push these buttons. And like I said earlier in my review, it's very difficult to learn these buttons, and they're also mashed together and really hard to use. So that's it for the end of my review. I hope you guys liked it. I hope I didn't go on too long. We're entering 30 minutes here, so I just want to say like, subscribe. I'm gonna make more videos. I'm gonna start doing customization with the expansion port. I want to do as much as I can with this camera. If you're still wondering who this camera is for, I would say this is an enthusiast. If you own a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, don't go out and spend the money on this. There's no reason, unless you absolutely need to get 60 frames a second in ProRes 422.